The Phantom Troupe and the Heil-Ly Mafia are two different types of profoundly broken people, and their clash threatens to destroy the world which has wronged them. Hello, and welcome back to Suck War Central. Today, I'd like to discuss all the interesting parallels Togashi's been drawing between the Phantom Troupe and the Heil-Ly and what it could all mean. Both these groups are forces of anarchy that are often talked about in similar ways by characters in the manga. The Jiyu and Sha'ar Mafia families have deemed them threats to the balance that need to be crushed. They've come aboard the ship to commit murder, and they often psychoanalyze each other by putting themselves in the other group's shoes. On the face of it, they seem to have a fair amount in common, and in my opinion, Togashi is using them to express similar ideas with very important distinctions. So let's get into it. We'll start off by discussing the group's backgrounds and motivations. Both were created, or in the Heil-Ly's case, torn down and rebuilt, seemingly in response to some sort of injustice. In the Phantom Troupe's case, this was the death of Sarasa, and in the Heil-Ly's case, it was that Morena was forced to live in the shadows. Both groups are victims of the upper classes in the world. Sarasa was killed by a rich man exploiting children while building a brand pretending to care about them, which, how's that for political commentary? And Morena was scarred and cast into the darkness in order to preserve the balance of the Kakin Empire and the legitimacy of the system of princes. The Heil-Ly also want to destroy the world, and according to Nobunaga, at one point so did the spiders. However, the perspectives they're making these decisions from are completely different. The Phantom Troupe of Meteor City have almost nothing. They're utterly destitute and desperate people living in poverty. They represent the lowest classes of people in the world. Morena, on the other hand, is rebelling from a middle-class position. We've seen that the Mafia bosses live in relative luxury, and the Mafia grunts aren't exactly poor. What's more, the tiers of the Black Whale get nicer the higher the number is, and the Heil-Ly controlled Tier 3, suggesting that they were the most well-off of the Mafia families. If both of these groups can be called revolutionary forces, then the Phantom Troupe represents a proletarian revolution. Think Vladimir Lenin's Russian Revolution, which started out with some good ideas and led to, well, you know. By the same token, the Heil-Ly are more of a bourgeois revolution, like the American Revolution, which had an understandable cause for rebellion that led to, well, you know. Now, so far my argument has hinged on Morena, but I don't want to neglect the other Heil-Ly members. I mean, they're a whole organization. So, I also want to point out that Morena is not the only privileged member of the Heil-Ly. The bulk of them have very middle-class professions. Like we have an artist, a pro wrestler, a pro gamer, a college student, a hacker. These are not the kinds of people who have suffered what the Phantom Troupe suffered on a daily basis just by virtue of growing up in Meteor City. That's not to say well-off people can't suffer. I mean, my life is pretty materially comfortable and I'm still suffering all the time. My point is just that it seems a bit less understandable for a group of relatively well-off people to up and decide to end the world. And this is where their motivations start to diverge. The Phantom Troupe's mission started off with a very clear goal in mind. In Corolla's words, get close to the killers and deal with them. Nobunaga says the troupe wanted to destroy the world, but in truth, this is more of an attitude, and it takes a backseat to the goal of avenging Sarasa. It's very clear that this is a mission of retribution. The same is true of their murderous plans aboard the Black Whale. They're there to hunt down and kill Hisoka to avenge Shalnark and Cordopi, and they decide to crush the Heil-Ly for harassing them. They react to specific injustices, and that's what triggers their violence. Even in a more generalized sense, they're thieves. All the violence they do in search of wealth and treasure is a type of reaction to being subjected to absolute poverty and oppression as children. By contrast, Morena's motivation of living in the shadows is the thing that takes a backseat compared to her general nihilism. She says, "Let us destroy it all just because." Side note, I don't really have a type, but the way she's drawn in these panels is just gorgeous. Anyway, Morena doesn't say, "Let's get revenge on the people who wronged us." Her desire for destruction seems to stem from a more generalized sense of bitterness and disgust with her existence. She also states that her traumatic backstory is what kept her living for her dream of destruction. This seems to indicate that had she lived like a normal person and not been scarred, she would have still felt this emptiness and contempt for the world. So if it's not the scarring inflicted upon second-track fakers, what could be the Heil-Ly's motivation for destroying the world? I posit that the Heil-Ly are acting out of a sense of what I call middle-class nihilism. By this, I mean that they have found modern life numbing and unsatisfying. There are plenty of works of literature expressing the idea that life is just boring and it would be fun to go apeshit. I believe the Heil-Ly are a manifestation of that idea. They live their lives in relative comfort, but have an awareness of being exploited by an unjust system. Because they are so consumed by existential emptiness, the thought of revolution to establish a better system just doesn't occur to them. All they want is to disrupt the tedium and daily grind of middle-class work and ennui by lashing out and tearing it all down. They want to take part in a murderous game just to feel something. And on the subject of murderous games, this also shows how part of the middle class's anger at the upper classes tends to be based on envy. Morena is an outcast of an upper class that routinely runs a death game every generation. It's like she wanted to be part of one so bad that she created her own game to emulate that. You can also see this middle-class nihilism in how the Heil-Ly just don't really give a crap about morals. They never claim that the world deserves to be destroyed or that they're unleashing righteous punishments on humanity. Luini just declares his intention to destroy the world to Nobunaga, and look at the language he uses. He never tries to convince anyone that the world should be or deserves to be destroyed. He just says he wants to do it, as if it should be self-evident why. Another example of this is Padeo's internal monologue. He talks about how all he's ever wanted to do is kill, and Morena's made that dream come true, earning his loyalty. This shows yet again that desperation to disrupt the routine of modern life in just the most extreme way possible, a violent reaction to the numb boredom of it all. The Heil-Ly are truly beyond morality. They don't care at all about how things should or shouldn't be. They just want to feel something. On the other hand, when they were founded, the Phantom Troupe were very much invested in the morality of what they were doing. During the Troupe's founding, Crollo talks about how Sarasa wouldn't want them to go down this path, and how if he ever sees her in heaven, he's going to beg her forgiveness. He's also very concerned with how the world should be and the morals of the whole thing, saying he won't forgive Sarasa's killers and making comments about the world's legal system. The Phantom Troupe's disgust for the world is born out of outrage over how they've been oppressed by those in power, while the Heil-Ly only have that in the back of their heads as a sort of idea. Another way in which the groups foil each other is in their reaction to losing comrades. To the Phantom Troupe, in certain ways, life is sacred and important. They were founded to avenge a fallen comrade, and their bonds with each other are incredibly potent. Over time, that life is sacred idea became our lives are sacred and fuck everyone else. They likely became appalled by the state of the world after watching hundreds of hours of snuff films shared on the network they created to trap Sarasa's killers, seeking comfort only in their bonds with each other. Even once they've become brutal mass murderers, they love each other and mourn Uvagin with a requiem of violence when he dies. Their violence is born out of incredibly strong and visceral emotions. The Heil-Ly, on the other hand, are the opposite. Their violence is born out of apathy. When Luini dies, none of them are really sad. Their reactions are just, bummer, we can't use his ability to farm kills anymore. The only demonstrations of camaraderie they have are Padeo briefly thinking about his loyalty to Morena, and Morena claiming that Damon, Tavalaris, and Quarrel are going off to get revenge on Henry, presumably for Padeo's murder. But it's clear that they don't actually care about him. Morena doesn't even mention Padeo's name, and when we cut over to the trio who have just leveled up, they're not like, alright, now we can avenge Padeo. They just talk about how cool leveling up is and how excited they are to start fighting. It's fitting that Morena's ability is a game, because everything is just a game to them, even the lives of their comrades. From everything we know about them, it seems like the Heil-Ly just found modern life soul-crushingly boring, and they didn't care enough to try to change it. They just wanted entertainment. To the Phantom Troupe, however, nothing is really a game. Sure, they enjoy fighting, but they're very serious about stealing, just as they were serious about finding Sarasa's killers. They didn't half-ass that. Crollo's plan was an incredibly hardcore one from the get-go, and the troupe made a joint promise to offer up their lives. They come from backgrounds of poverty, where you have to be serious about things or you die. The middle-class Heil-Ly, however, can afford to screw around, and that's essentially what all this is to them. The Phantom Troupe, whether they still acknowledge it or not, no matter how disconnected they've become from their roots, still fight to improve their own conditions. It's not murder and destruction for the sake of it. They chase wealth due to the trauma of growing up poor. The people of Meteor City were powerless and at the bottom of the world's food chain, historically being victims of violence. This is how the Phantom Troupe grew up, and this powerlessness and victimhood traumatized them deeply. By enacting violence in much the same way as what was done to them, and by seeking power in the form of wealth, the Phantom Troupe are trying to make up for that and heal the wounds of their inner children. Even if they know they have become evil and corrupted, they still care about themselves. That's what this is all for. And that's why Nobunaga was so disgusted by Luini's declaration that he wanted to destroy the world. He could tell that there were no beliefs behind those eyes, that life was just a game to him, and that was an insult to everything he and the Phantom Troupe had been through. It's why he decided so quickly to crush the Heil-Ly family. Conversely, Luini is probably middle class. He doesn't understand where the Phantom Troupe's desires come from or how they're different. All he sees are the similarities, and that's why he assumes the spiders will be receptive to his desires. The Heil-Ly and the Phantom Troupe are a fascinating exploration by Togashi of how oppression by the ultra-wealthy makes monsters out of people. It's the old saying, hurt people hurt people. And make no mistake, the Heil-Ly are still an oppressed class, even if they're more comfortable than the Phantom Troupe by a wide margin. They may have material comfort, but they also live in the shadow of the Kakin monarchy and are stuck in meaningless lives alienated from their labor. Both groups are acutely aware of how little power they have in society controlled by the elite and enjoy enacting violence to get a taste of that control. I also think Togashi is making a point here about the different ways in which types of societal dissatisfaction can produce wildly different results. Deny people material comfort, and they'll produce a culture where they care about each other and can find satisfaction in seizing those comforts. Give people material comfort but nothing to care about, and they'll happily burn the whole world to the ground just to feel some warmth. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this dive into the ways in which the Heil-Ly and the Phantom Troupe parallel each other. I know this was a bit of a different type of analysis than my usual. It was more thematic and literary. If you'd enjoy more of these in the future, or if you'd prefer I stick to the usual, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I hope you have a wonderful day.